I want to ask each of you about criticisms you have faced over the course of this campaign. Mr. McKee, this topic has come up a lot, as you know, ILO Group. There's a federal and state investigation into the controversial education contract your administration awarded to consulting firm ILO Group. They're looking into how the deal came together. Now, your office has repeatedly refused to tell us if your administration has been subpoenaed as part of this probe. So please answer it now. Have you or your administration received a subpoena?
So I've answered the question about myself, no. Now, as far as the situation in terms of that contract or that ILO agreement, I'm happy to talk about that in more detail if you want.
Okay, but has your administration received a subpoena?
My administration is dealing with it in terms internally, in terms of the fact that we have someone that's served 5 administrations in our legal.
Is
you
that
can
a
give
yes?
them a call.
Is that a yes?
No, that's not. I'm not making comment on that. I'm not going to make comment on that. You can. That'll be handled internally.
Do you think the people of Rhode
I've
Island
answered
have
the
a right
question
to know?
I've answered the question about myself, right? No. The answer is no.
Do you think the people of Rhode Island have a right to know whether or not your administration has been subpoenaed by the federal government?
They have the right to know from me whether I have or not, and I said no.
You're not responsible for your entire administration?
Of course I am.
Okay.
The way that it's being handled right now is the way it should be handled, by somebody that has experience relative to the issues, and they don't have to do it. And the fact of the matter is that the explanation that was given, which through a letter, you have it, Tim, the reason that was given, I think is substantial, it's appropriate.
You have defended throughout the campaign your handling of the ILO contract. But if it wasn't all that bad, how come the General Assembly passed a law to overhaul the bidding process because they felt it was abused? And in fact, Mr. McKee, you signed it. If nothing was wrong, then why agree to change the law that handles these public bids?
Well, because I filed a state statute. And the reason it got changed is because we did file a state statute in the procurement process that went underway for the Department of Administration. Remember, I want to just reflect a little bit about where we were on March 2nd, 2021. We were in the state of emergency like we've never seen before. We didn't know whether people were going to get vaccinated. We had 90,000 doses on the shelf when I showed up. We're #1 in vaccination right now. We didn't know whether the economy was going to open up. We didn't know whether people were going to lose their homes, lose their jobs, lose their businesses. Right now, we lead the Northeast in an economic recovery, and we didn't know about a safe opening of our schools. So my urgency there was big. I happened to be brought in as a governor during the largest state of emergency in the history of the state of Rhode Island. I was responsible for the health and welfare for everybody in the state, including the students that went to the schools. Okay. We followed the procurement strategy. The procurement came back with a recommendation. We accepted the recommendation, and then we brought on a ILO group as well as somebody to do the higher ed, the best higher ed opening in the country, I believe, as well as our schools.
All right, I'm going to fold in Mr. Brown here. You have repeatedly criticized Mr. McKee on this topic, even recently equating him to the late Buddy Cianci and suggesting Mr. McKee could be indicted. There is no public indication, nor has anyone reported that Mr. McKee is the target of this federal investigation. So it seems your goal is to throw bombs for your political benefit. Is that really responsible for someone that wants to be governor of Rhode Island?
I think...
Please.
So the FBI is not interested in going after staff members. They're interested in people in power and holding them accountable. It wasn't I who decided that there was something that needed to be looked into by the FBI. It was the United States government. And they did make that decision months ago. And they have spent a lot of time investigating Governor McKee's administration. So they think there is something here that needs to be looked at. Governor McKee knew when he decided to run for office that his administration was under criminal investigation by the FBI. I do think he owes it to the people of the state to tell them whether or not, if he's indicted in office, he will resign.
What evidence do you have, though, that this investigation, I mean, you drop if Mr. McKee is indicted. There is no, again, indication that he is the target of this investigation. What evidence do you have that that is, in fact, the case? And I want to remind the audience that this is a live studio, and we will take time away from your candidate when you applaud. Mr. Brown.
Well, as I said, Tim, the FBI is not really interested in going after staff members. They're interested in rooting out corruption at the top, the people in power. That's what they spend their time on. The FBI has got a lot on their hands in this country, as we know. They're not going to waste their time unless they think there is a serious problem and unless they think it's coming from the top. And 1/3 of FBI investigations, more than 1/3, end in indictment. So it's
That means
serious
2/3
possibility.
don't.
That's
The majority don't.
And if Rhode Islanders want to take that chance, that there's better than a 1/3 chance that we've got a governor in office who may be indicted in the coming months, if they want to take that chance, I would not support that.
Before I go to Ms. Folks, Mr. McKee, would you like 30 seconds to respond to any of that, or do you want me to move on?
Give me the last say. I'll listen to what everybody says. But clearly, I should have the last say here with these
Okay,
false
we'll see.
attacks.
I'm actually going to
these
change.
false attacks that are happening here, right? In terms of, and quite frankly, a certain amount of misrepresentation. Happy to hear from the other two opponents, and I'd like to have.
Well, I'm going to change the topic for you, Ms.
Well, I'd
Folks,
like to add
actually.
one-
Well,
I'd like
I'm
to
going to
add-
ask you a question first. It's a different
fine.
critique for you. When you were the head of Hudson's Bay Company, you foreshadowed employee layoffs by calling it, quote, low-hanging fruit on a conference call with investors. Look, even a reporter for Bloomberg covering that call said the quote was probably a poor choice of words. In retrospect, do you regret framing it that way?
What I described as the low-hanging fruit was really the fact that this company was burning $1 billion in cash when I arrived, and there was huge opportunity to invest in technology, to invest in our frontline employees so they had the tools that they could use to serve people. We had big decisions to make, and those were hard decisions, but I'm really proud of giving the teams the resources they need. We lifted our customer service scores. We turned the business around.
Did people lose their
got
jobs?
We got it from $1 billion of cash that we were burning to cash flow neutral, and we were able to really successfully reposition the company.
But did people lose their jobs in the
Some
wake of
people
those?
lost their jobs, but the lion's share of people did not lose their jobs. In fact, the people were really pleased that we set the company back on track. When I arrived, it was a mess of a company. It had been put together by real estate investors, and what we did is we stabilized it and we set it up so people could have really good futures.
Ms. Gorbea,
I would like to follow up, though.
I'll give you 30
because Give
seconds.
me a chance on the subpoena issue.
Sure.
I would not want to prejudge an indictment. Only the FBI and the Attorney General will be able to tell on the indictment whether that's relevant. But I do think it's very fair that the governor answer the question on whether his administration received a subpoena, because this is something the people of Rhode Island deserve to know. Even Donald Trump has released his subpoena. So, Governor, I do call on you to do it. I think it's quite relevant in this election that everyone know the answer to that question.
Mr. McKee.
I'll end with this.
Okay.
I know what I did and didn't do. Every decision I made since I've been governor has been in the best interest of the people in the state of Rhode Island and no one else.
All right, Ms. Gorbea, you're getting heat from your opponents about a mishap with the new touchscreen voting machine. Some Spanish language ballots had candidate names from the 2018 election. Now look, it's been fixed and the vendor admits it was their fault, but at a time when there's such distrust in elections, your campaign says your staff waited an entire day to inform you of such a critical issue. Were they afraid to tell you about this, or is that standard operating procedure in your office? What happened there?
No, so here's the thing. First of all, let me say that as somebody who for 8 years as your Secretary of State has fought tirelessly to make sure that elections are not only fair and accurate, but that we protect voting rights in this state, I'm very proud of the advances that we've made. I was outraged by the mistakes that were admitted to by ES&S and the lack of oversight that the Board of Elections displayed over the work that was being done by a vendor. When I was told about this event, it was literally within 24 hours. So my staff...
Is that okay with you, 24 hours?
No, so here's the problem. So this is not happening in my office. It is happening in a different agency. There's a vendor involved. And so my staff, knowing that I'm going to ask them about 25 different questions, gathered all the information, and then within 24 hours, actually got the information to me. And within, like, that same day, I drafted a letter to the Board of Elections Chairwoman, Diane Medeiros, asking for full transparency to the public. I went ahead and asked for them to do an audit of the machines, and I made sure that the public knew about it by informing the WPRI investigative team, because in the end, transparency is the best method to convey trust in a system.
All right, before we move on to Ted, just a follow-up question to you. Since, right before we walked into this auditorium, it emerged that a Providence candidate, in fact, your own former Deputy Secretary of State, his name was misspelled. He's running for Providence mayor. So, and this happened after these corrections were supposed to have taken place.
Yeah, no, again, I am outraged because I was assured by both the vendor and the Board of Elections that they had taken all measures to check things out. Now, clearly, we need a full independent audit into what is going on in terms of reviewing those machines.
Can I just say, this is the Chief Elections Officer of the state of Rhode Island, ultimately responsible for fast, fair, and accurate elections. It is not okay to hide by all these different issues that she's raising. She said just last week that we could trust her to have safe elections. We now have become a laughingstock in this country for a place where we can't trust our voting machines. And this is not okay from the person who is the Chief
15 seconds, and we are moving on, Ms. Barbier.
Completely disagree with that characterization. If anything, I have acted forcefully to make sure that we have trust and transparency in this election. I have moved for solutions to be addressed by the Board of Elections, and I stand by my record over 8 years of making sure that Rhode Islanders can trust their elections.
We are moving on, Ms. Folks.